Good evening and welcome to the Lower Makefield Township Planning Commission meeting for Monday, November 9th, 2020. I call this meeting to order. The first item on our agenda is an approval of the minutes of the October 12th, 2020 meeting. Do any of the members have questions, comments, or edits to those minutes? Hearing none, does any member move to approve those minutes?
I'll make a motion.
I move to approve.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Very good. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes. Before we get to the next item on the agenda, which is the Pennsylvania American Water Company item, since we now do have a fifth member to the Planning Commission, let's welcome Tejinder Gill, or TJ. Welcome to the Planning Commission, and we are very happy to have you join us.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm happy to be here.
With that, now that we have a full membership of 5 members, I would like to reorganize and reassign, since we've been without a chair for the last several months since Craig Bryson's departure. Barbara, do I have to make a formal motion to begin the process, or?
I would make a formal motion to temporarily reorganize for the remainder of the year and then proceed from there to make a motion for a chairperson.
So moved. Do I have a second to reorganize for the remainder of this year?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Very good. Let's do it. So I would like to make a motion to appoint Anthony Bush as the chair of the Planning Commission.
I appreciate Ross, I appreciate that. I was going to suggest you, since you've been handling this so capably since Craig left.
But I beat you to it. So there's a motion on the table. Wow, just awkwardness in Planning Commission. I will respectfully decline your motion anyway, Anthony. So noted.
I'll second your motion.
It's only for 3 more meetings, Tony. Then we can reorganize again in January.
Fair enough.
Very good. All those in favor? Aye.
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 Very good.
Now, I would recommend that you make an appointment of a vice chair too, just in the event the chair is not available for a meeting for some reason.
Actually, currently Ross is still the vice chair.
Oh, Ross is the vice?
Yeah, so we could just leave that in place if you're so inclined.
That works.
Yep. Yes.
Very good.
How about, who was secretary though?
I was secretary.
Then you may need a new secretary.
Okay. So at this point, I think I'm taking the baton from Ross, and Ross looks happy about that. And I would say, is there a motion for a secretary? A lot of silence. Adrian, Dawn, TJ?
They're hoping that you don't see them.
Well, I make a motion that we nominate Adrian, just in terms of seniority, as the secretary.
That's amazing.
Second.
I'd like to call the question for Adrian Costello as secretary of the Planning Commission. All in favor?
Aye.
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 And someone's going to have to explain.
The motion passes. Congratulations. Okay. So the next item on our agenda this evening is the Pennsylvania American Water Company, Oxford Valley Road Booster Pump Station Final Land Development Plan. And this was before us either at our last meeting or the meeting immediately prior to it.
Mm-hmm.
Jim, can you tell us what's different between now and when this was before us last? before we hear from the applicant? Okay, Jim's not there. Who's we're here from the applicant?
Andrew.
How about Andy?
Andy. Okay, Andy.
To my knowledge, there has not been a second submission from when it was observed last. Jim, is that correct?
That is correct. The applicant should be here in the meeting.
Yes.
And he is. So when this was before us last, we left off with there were certain changes that were going to be made to the plans, I believe. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
So the last we were here, we were looking for recommendation from the Planning Commission for to go to the zoning hearing board for the proposed special exception.
I apologize. You're right. Okay.
Since then, we have gone to the zoning hearing board, and they have granted the special exception and also the variance for the type 2 vegetative buffer. We've also since our previous planning commission or the previous planning commission meeting, we've received the comment letter from the engineer and other various entities, and we're currently working through those comments. I know something that's been brought up is the width of the proposed driveway. It has been something that has been discussions about potentially reducing the size of the driveway. And it's certainly something we can look into. I know there's portions of the driveway that are being driven widthwise based upon turning movements of trucks that need to access the pump station. And but I think there may be some areas where we can shave it down slightly. But yeah, if the township is open to some sort of maybe irregularly widthed driveway, that's something we can certainly look into.
I think we ought to go through the review letters. Starting off with the November 6th Remington Vernick letter. Yeah, you have that in front of you?
I do, yep.
Okay. You want to tell us what your what your position is with regard to these comments?
I guess, do you want me to go through all of them, or are there any in particular that you wanted to discuss? I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Well, are they will comply comments, or are there problems with them?
No, I think they're all generally, will comply. I think a majority of them are, kind of plain cleanup, clarification type items that we can certainly provide. We're still coordinating with the County Conservation District and the county for their reviews and their approvals. But besides that, there's nothing in the letter itself that we don't think we'll be able to comply with. There is one item that mentioned potential permeable pavers or permeable pavement. And I guess we were trying to avoid that just due to potential maintenance issues and due to the fact that we have a relatively low impact infiltration basin. It's a relatively small facility to the size of the site. But besides that, I think we can comply with the remainder of the letter.
And specifically, do you remember what number that was? There's 44 items on here. That's why I'm just asking for the record's clear what we're talking about.
Number 41.
Okay.
Yeah, and as Mr. Leonard had mentioned, the driveway, the straight portion coming in off the road, it currently is about 12 feet wide. I went and measured it today. And I understand the need to have the right turning radius for the trucks and everything when you make that turn. So perhaps a narrower driveway going up the straight portion and then have a variable width as you go make the curve so that a larger vehicle can make the turn without rutting the grass would make sense, as Jason had mentioned. And I think that was one of the EAC's recommendation, that they thought the 20-foot width was maybe a little bit excessive.
With regard to the driveway, I recall when you were before us last, there was the issue of it had gone on to township-owned property where it made the turn, and that was there was no easement. It was just something that had happened over time, and no one noticed it. Is that what's happening to that piece of land where township property was used for turning?
So that's just going to be the driveway that's cutting across the township property is going to be removed. It'll be revegetated with just a kind of a typical seed mix. But yeah, the entirety of the driveway that is currently on township property will be removed.
Okay. Do other planning commission members have any comments or questions about the Remington-Vernick review letter?
I have a question on, with regard to number 23, regarding the stormwater basin.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just go into that a little bit?
For the comment number 23 concerns the amount of impervious area to be provided for the development. Our regulations indicate that if it's more than 5,000 square feet of impervious area, then peak rate control requirements are needed for stormwater management. The applicant in their stormwater report indicates that it's less than 5,000 square feet that they're adding. But on the plan, it shows more than 5,000. So if you could just clarify that, that might go a long way to addressing comment number 23.
Sure, and this is something I did want to talk with you about. The reason for the discrepancy is a portion of the impervious area that we're moving is actually the stuff that's off the site. So that area that we're listing there, that is just looking purely at the property that PWC owns. But actually, when you take into account the offsite area that's being taken into account in that construction easement, we're going to be removing that impervious as well, which would reduce the net increase would be less than the 5,000.
So you're removing impervious area off-site within the construction easement, and that takes it down. That takes the overall net increase to under the 5,000 square foot threshold.
That's correct.
Okay. Then it would be my interpretation that peak rate control would not be required in that instance.
Mr. Bush, I just want to point out, and Mr. Pokel can change it, but in the review letter under items 16 and 20, those items have already been addressed by the zoning hearing board at their last board meeting of November 2nd. So the special exception was approved as well as the variance for the planning buffer.
Thank you for noting that.
Welcome.
Any other comments from board members concerning the Remington-Vernick review letter?
I just have two quick questions. Number one is with regards to number 21. That is just a formality on the lighting, that nothing is changing pertaining to the lighting. It's just that it needs to be provided on the plans. Is that correct?
Yes, as I understand it.
Okay.
Well, there's no site lighting shown on the plan, so
But there's no plan for any change in existing lighting, or it's just that it's absent from the plan.
I don't know, but the applicant can speak to that.
Well, I guess, are you guys requiring additional site lighting than what's currently on site today?
No,
What he's
we're just
saying-
wondering, is there any change in the lighting? Or are you providing lighting other than what already currently exists?
Craig, is there any additional lighting that is being proposed on the site?
Yes, I believe the stations will have a wall pack. I'm not sure if it's there's one on each side. I'd have to look at the plans on that. but I'm not sure that they're finalized yet either.
So no pole mounted lighting to light up the driveway or anything like that?
No, there was none of that planned to my knowledge.
And let the record reflect that was Craig Darish from Pennsylvania American Water Company.
I guess to the extent that there is pole lighting contemplated, which we're not sure about, it doesn't sound like there is, but to the extent there is, how does that affect neighbors across the street? And do we need to address that now?
Well, I mean, they would have to submit a lighting plan that is, reviewed by us. And to make sure that it's in compliance with the township standards for dark sky provision and for no projection of light onto adjacent properties.
And for a wall pack, that would mean that the wall pack would have to be focused downward and or shields put on it so you don't see the glare from the light. We've been dealing with that recently on another project where the lights that were building mounted were a little bit obtrusive to the neighbors, so they just put shields on them to make it better.
But no additional lighting is being contemplated at this time, correct?
Other than the wall packs on the station itself, no. Not to my knowledge.
Good. My second question is with regards to the letter from the Lower Makefield Township Environmental Advisory Council. They raised the issue that most of the trees that will be cut down are from township property, and therefore they recommended the replacement trees to be planted on township property. Is that something that is either not going to be addressed because of the buffer variance, and I actually think that's a separate issue, the buffer versus the tree replacement, is the intent of American Water to replace those trees on township property?
I believe we can replace those trees. To my understanding, we are not disturbing trees that are off of the current property. So I'm not sure where that comment is coming from with removal of trees. I know there's some trees along the proposed driveway that will be cut back, but I believe those are all on PWC's property.
Jason, I didn't a question come up similar to that, but it was just because of on the aerial photo that the property lines are kind of skewed, so it looked as if some of our disturbance was on the township property, but in fact it's not. Didn't that come up at one point?
I know there's been some confusion there, because the aerial image, when you look at it, I believe on the county GIS, I think it shows the property lines kind of skewed, as you said.
We had this the last time we talked to you guys.
I think that's something that can easily be addressed by, during construction, you stake out the property line.
Mm-hmm.
And I think another request, I believe it was in the engineer's review letter, was about putting orange construction fence along the vegetation that's going to be protected. So that would be something we would be adding to the plans as well.
And to clarify, it was vague from the EAC's letter as to it just generally states that an area of 0.13 acres of trees will be removed, and it's not clear whether those meet the standard of what needs to be replaced. So understood to that point.
Okay. And just to clarify, there's no way that the applicant can remove trees from township property without either township approval or township demanding that trees be replaced. So I think it was just a misinterpretation of the lines, the property lines. PA American Water would have absolutely no authority to remove trees on anybody's property other than their own.
That's understood. Absolutely.
I think the EAC letter was also referring to trees being removed from the water company's property, though, as well.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think also to that point, that the tree removal on PWC's property may be slightly reduced given the variable width driveway that we're going to try and implement in order to reduce tree removal and also reduce impervious surface.
Are you looking to get a recommendation as to both preliminary and final land development? Or would you rather just deal with preliminary tonight, address all of the issues that are raised in the township engineer's review letter, and then come back for your final?
We had actually requested a preliminary / final submission to avoid the preliminary process. Ideally we would, be looking for some sort of conditional approval, but I don't know if that's typically how this township operates in terms of granting conditional approval based upon addressing the remaining comments that are outstanding.
Well, Mr. Majewski, in light of the number of proposed comments from Remington Vernick, do you believe this plan is in a position to be recommended for both preliminary and final land development approval, or would you recommend that the plan be revised to address the comments and then an additional review occur by the Planning Commission?
Well, I don't believe that any of the comments necessitate the Planning Commission review. There's no real layout change. They'll be just narrowing the driveway in spots and adding the appropriate notes and other issues that were raised in our Township Engineer's review letter and the EAC letter. And unless the Planning Commission was inclined to have it come back, I think that if they were so inclined to grant an approval, that the only thing I would recommend is that they clean up those items before they go in front of the Board of Supervisors.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the Planning Commission's call.
The question I have about just getting back to the trees before we get to the issue of preliminary and final is it sounds like there needs to be a calculation as to number of trees that need to be replaced that are greater than 10 inches. And question being, is there room for them on site? And if not, is there room for them on site for any additional trees of that to be planted?
I think there is room for tree replacement, and we would certainly, comply with that calculation that's being requested.
If there's not sufficient room, there is the area where currently the road cuts over on the township property, and I believe the township would certainly be amenable to adding trees to revegetate that area.
And I believe, Craig, you can speak to this, but I believe PAWC would be open to that tree replacement in that township property if needed.
Yes.
Do other Planning Commission members have any other comments?
I have none.
Does someone want to make a motion?
Well, if somebody was inclined to make a motion, I would say the motion would be to recommend to the Board of Supervisors approval of the preliminary and final land development application of PA American Water for tax parcel 20-34-48, subject to compliance with all of the comments set forth in the Township Engineer's Review Letter of November 6, 2020, in addition to compliance with the comments provided by the Township's Safe Highway Engineering Officer dated October 6, 2020, the Fire Chief's Review of October 2nd, 2020, the EAC's recommendation and comments with respect to the replacement of trees cut down on the property, as well as compliance with any and all conditions of approval previously imposed by the Planning Commission and the Zoning Hearing Board with respect to the special exception and variances that were approved for this project.
Yeah, there was one exception, I think, to Andrew's comments, and that was with the porous pavers. Correct? That was the one line item they said they weren't inclined to comply with.
That is
I believe
correct.
that's correct.
But it just says consider using porous paving. It's not a mandatory requirement. And that, according to, as I'm reading it, would indicate that the trail would be more consistent or conducive to porous paving. But as I'm reading it, it's just saying consider using porous paving. I would recommend the motion be amended that the issue of porous paving be left up to the Board of Supervisors to see if they would grant a waiver from that requirement.
That makes sense.
Jim, we can't hear you if you're trying to talk.
Sorry. Thank you. As Mr. Costello pointed out, it's not a waiver necessarily, so that probably should be compliance with the Remington Vernick letter, except for comment number 41 for the porous pavement. And there's one other issue in the safe highway engineering. They did say that they have no objection to the plans. Their only question was if this will necessitate additional traffic. And I believe Mr. Darush at the prior meeting had said that there isn't the anticipation that more traffic will be generated. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Can we also make a notation that with regard to that number 23, that the post-development differential and impervious surface will be less than 5,000 from whatever construction they're doing on both properties that affect both properties?
Yeah, that's actually another one, since based on what they had said, which I believe is correct, that they will comply with that. Well, it could either be will comply or you could strike that. You could say except for comment number 20, whatever, 23, and the other one I mentioned.
41.
Thank you.
Okay, so does anyone want to make the motion as articulated by Barbara?
I will. So moved.
Is there a second?
A second.
Before we take a vote, is there public comment? Any public comment on this item?
No public comment.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? There being none, the motion passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
The next item on our agenda is the Prickett Preserve development at Edgewood, plan number 670. I guess we're waiting for the applicant to enter.
We're bringing them in now.
I think we're there. Yeah, we're in the upper. Do you want to move the camera over to see?
Okay. For those who have just entered on behalf of Prickett Preserve, could you identify yourselves?
Yes, my name is Steve Harris. I'm the attorney that's representing the applicant in this matter. With me here today is Vince DeLuca and Bob Rosenthal of ELU DeLuca Yardley LLC, the developer of the commercial portion of the property, and Bob Dwyer of Shady Brook Investors LP, the developer of the residential portion of the property. I'm also here with Bill Reardon Jason Korzak and George Bongard of Bowler Engineering, the engineers on this property. Online, we have Chris Williams, who's with McMahon and is the traffic engineer, Seth Shapiro from the planning operation. John Kennedy may or may not be joining us later. Did I miss anybody?
That's it. Travis North from
Travis who?
Travis North from our office, who's a landscape architect, is
okay.
on to address some open space design.
So that's our group. We have a short presentation that we'd like to begin with. We received, I think 10 reviews, and we recognize that the plan is going to have to be revised and brought back. We've sent you a response letter that I'm sure you haven't had an opportunity to review yet, but it will provide background to where we're going in this. So I think we'll start by having the presentation, and then we'll go to any questions that the commission might have of the applicants.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Sure. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And can everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So good evening. My name is Seth Shapiro. I'm a principal and the director of planning and urban design for Barton Partners. We are an architecture and land planning and landscape firm located in Norristown, and we've been working on this project for well over a year now. With me today from my office is one of my partners, Matt Koenig. Matt is an architect and an architectural principal.
Hey guys, could you take the presentation full screen, please?
Is that something I need to do?
Yeah.
Full screen, right? How's that?
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. So with me tonight is one of my partners, Matt Koenig, who's one of the architecture principals. Also, Lauren Moran, who is one of our landscape architects who's been working on this project. And you'll hear a little bit from Lauren and Travis as we talk about an option, actually, for the landscape, which is so important for this project. Obviously, this is going to be a little bit of a rehash of a prior presentation, but there's going to be a bunch of updates here about what has changed in the plan since last fall as we've worked through the zoning process. Obviously, this is a very significant site. It's been with the Prickett family for close to 70 years, big antique dealer, and there are two really significant buildings on this site. Which when we first looked at it, we thought, hey, this is something that we need to maintain, and how can we do that? I think everybody knows the history of this site, but so these are the two buildings. It's the barn and the main farmhouse on the site that we are intending to maintain and preserve and actually adaptively reuse, and we'll get into a little bit of that later. But it's not only about what's on the site; it's about what's the surrounding area character of Lower Makefield, and it's relatively eclectic. It's something we would refer to as a little bit more farmhouse. But as you can see in the lower right, there's been some more modern development. But even development after, say, this office building has taken on more of a traditional tact. So that's something that we wanted to keep in mind as we started to investigate this. So as I mentioned, when we look at this site, we don't look at it as a blank site. We immediately recognize that the existing farmhouse and the existing barn were things that needed to be maintained. Knowing the programmatic requirements that we had to work with, that actually presented itself with quite the challenge, but also, we think, an incredible opportunity to create a civic space. So with that, we organize our retail uses. Obviously, the big red box up there is the Wegmans. Everybody knows about the Wegmans. But then back last fall, when we were working on this, we organized other retail uses around a central open space. And this is relatively unique. Usually you would see a big retail anchor and then a strip of retail shops and a big parking lot, a strip center, if you will. That's not what this is. And so there was also the desire, and there's been this long talk of adding sort of more of a mixed use aspect to this site. And so we have on the sort of I guess it's really south because plan is to the left, north is to the left, a residential use. And for us, the big thing about that is the interconnectivity. We don't just want to separate residential from everything else. We want everything to be connected and walkable and have appropriate outdoor activities and spaces, not only for the people using this, but for the township in general. So we developed this master plan. This was an illustrative plan that was developed about a year ago, and it's been in front of this board and it's been in the township for a while. Again, you have your Wegmans here. You have various other retail uses here, restaurants, other such uses, and then the residential over here. And that's where things stood for a while until we got past sort of some zoning issues. And then we went into some more detailed design. The interesting thing about that was that because we had sort of put out this very strong concept, we think a very strong concept, where we went ahead even at the zoning level and created these renderings, sort of this idea of what this civic space could be in the middle of the project. We were able to maintain all of that, right? We used all of this precedent to sort of guide us in how we were going to design this, right down to sort of the retail architecture. And these were things that were presented back during the zoning process, which brings us to where we are today. We are now in the preliminary plan process, and the plan on the screen now is what has been presented so what has been submitted, and we have the letters in regard to this plan. And this plan is remarkably similar, almost identical to that plan that we went through from the zoning exercise because of, I think, the hard work that this team has done. And so just to look at that, this is now a colored version of the land development submission plan. And I just want to point out the very minor differences. For one, this building has been rotated and moved to the center here. Second, we added a right in, right out off of Stony Hill Road here, and we eliminated a full access right here, but we actually created sort of a pickup and drop off area here. Otherwise, this plan, which is really organized around having that copious open spaces, pedestrian connectivity, it remains the same. And you should keep in mind that this is sort of our philosophy, and this was done in a pre-COVID world, right? This was the idea that all of these retail uses would have lots of outdoor space, that they focused on an outdoor civic space, was generated well before sort of the strange circumstances that we find ourselves in now. And of course, we're finding out that the places that are succeeding have these aspects to them. So with that, we created this diagram, right? This diagram is about that pedestrian connectivity. You can see, not only, of course, this shared use path, this mixed use path, and its link up into the village here, but internal to the site. This site is set up so that someone who is coming here is parking once and going to the various places. People who are living here hopefully are coming home from work when they can go back to work. Maybe they're walking over to the Wegmans. That walkability is sort of the key aspect of this. And of course, the central open space, right? Not a parking lot, but a real gathering space. So we wanted to update the renderings for those small changes. Actually, one of those other small changes I want to take you through was actually the creation of something here that we call a WOONRF. It's WOONRF. It's a Dutch term for a shared space. It's not a parking lot. It's not a street. It's not a plaza. It's all of those things. And it maybe at some point, when there's times that we can gather again, it's an area that could be closed off. And so we wanted to do some renderings that really showed that character. So that's what I'm going to show you now. Here is a rendering of that space. Here is the old farmhouse. Here is the barn in the distance here. And here are some of the retail buildings that surround that civic space. And you'll notice we're actually delineating the space here with bollards and not necessarily curves. It keeps it flat and it creates sort of a much larger space that sort of favors pedestrians. Here's another view looking down onto that space. Again, you can see the farmhouse, you can see the barn, and actually you can see an addition to the barn, which we can talk about. And again, this idea that this is an open space. And in these renderings, this open space is sort of not really addressed, right? It's left as grass, it's left as tree space, but we think it actually can be so much more. And we're going to present an idea of what that could be, but we're not there yet. And I think we need more feedback from the township on to what this space can be. And we'll get to that in a minute. So here's another another view looking down into that space. Again, this is what's represented on the land development plans, the idea of possibly a little stage and a little seating area. But here's another idea. And this is sort of a zoom in of a different concept for that space that we think could make it even more dynamic. Travis and Lauren, who are on the call, maybe can take us through some of the ideas around this space. But it's really about this whole area here, right? This whole area with the house and with the barn. So with that, I don't know if Travis or Lauren want to add a couple things.
Yeah, so can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
For the record, my name is Travis North, landscape architect with Bowler. Bowler is working very closely with Barton to develop this space, and Lauren with Barton has been part of this as well. And I think we can all agree that the outdoor space and the use of this outdoor space is very important both to the township and to the owners of the site. And we envision this space being multi-purpose. So we are working with this concept, and I want to emphasize that this is just the concept of how this outdoor space can be used with the expanded barn, with the original house, what potential tenants could be in each of these spaces. If this center block is closed down and blocked off to vehicular traffic for a couple times throughout the year, this could be used as a festival space. In those times when it's not like that, we have a stage area that we're suggested in here that might be used for meditation or fitness sessions, or even just outdoor events with some live music or some sort of performances. And this is all designed in a way that it could be adapted pretty easily for any sort of use. If there's nothing going on, all of this could just be kind of space where people could just hang out passively. We have a large open lawn in the front, and we are preserving as many trees up at the front. You'll see that alley that in the center there, those are existing trees that we're working to preserve. There's a very large tree over by the barn that we're looking to preserve. And we've created now a destination for residents, both in the development and outside of the development through all these connective paths, that this could be useful for everybody, even beyond the retail. And so we are working on this, again, as a concept. We expect to continue to work with the township and representatives of the township to further evolve this space. As we are talking with potential tenants for this, we are also going to be adapting this space. So this is a first blush, and I think this shows a good idea of where we're headed with this design.
So I would just want to add one or two other things to that. One of I think the major moves that this space does, and you'll notice the trail down here, right? This large sort of recreation path. Instead of just driving it straight through as sort of something that is adjacent to a road, we actually began to pull it into the site, right? We want it to be part of this site here. The second is this space up here. This is right across a crosswalk here from Wegmans. As you know, in normal times, Wegmans has that large sort of buffet takeout area, and we think this is a wonderful place that some of that can be really enjoyed. And then lastly, you'll notice that these little red dots, right, around all of these buildings, each one of these buildings has outdoor seating areas. Again, in a post-COVID world, we think that's incredibly important. And again, the plan was very easy to adapt. This next slide is actually, again, some of the sort of the details that could be a part of that space. I don't know if Travis or Lauren, you want to talk about anything that's in here?
Yeah, sure. So what we're proposing is having some outdoor fire feature, as you can see on the upper top of the screen. Also, part of that would be pulling some of the original stonework that you can see in the barn and also the house, and kind of creating some of the walls that you'll see in the space, somewhat like rebuilding them, but also making sure that they kind of like just show passage to the past of the site. And then we also have some different pavement patterns. We also have some seat walls, and then some shade structure that would be positioned over the stage area of the open space.
And again, I think what we really want to these are all just ideas that we're brainstorming on. We're going to continue to work with the township to make sure that everything sort of fits the needs of the township and the applicant as well.
So the other thing that has been developed more carefully in the last months is the actual retail architecture itself. And these are renderings of what we think those buildings might look like. As you can see, we've taken some hints in terms of the form, in terms of the farmhouse, but also while the forms are traditional, the materials are modern, and some of the expression is modern, and we think that's a pretty good blend. As I said, Matt Koenig is on the phone. He's the architecture principal in our office who's handling this. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to this, Matt?
No, I mean, I think we're just trying to keep the forms and shapes very simple. You know, it does have an upscale farmhouse vernacular. And, you know, we're not really trying to stand out. We're trying to really create a village of buildings, and they all kind of just work together to allow the house and the barn to really kind of stand out in that center green space.
Right. And that was actually an interesting comment you just made, because one of the things we've been struggling with a little bit is do we integrate some of the stone work into these buildings? And I think we've been going back and forth on that. And I think my vote is actually leave the stone off of these buildings, let the stone on the existing buildings sort of be celebrated that way. Obviously, there's the Wegmans. So we wanted to show you what the Wegmans is going to look like, an elevation that is provided to us. Here you can see the sort of the top of the spire here. But we also wanted to put it in context with the heavy buffer that sits behind it, as well as obviously there's a large cell tower that sits over here. Obviously to the right is 295 now, right? Yeah, 295. So that's what the Wegmans might look like or will look like. And then we have the residential piece. So this is actually a residential community that we did along with Bowler and the folks at Equus. It actually sits across from their office. And this is sort of the model of what we're talking about, sort of the building types that we're talking about. For this one, there'd be a large central clubhouse and then a series of smaller buildings, smaller unit garden-style buildings. But we don't necessarily think that this is the right look. So we actually have this. We've taken those buildings and sort of reformatted them to make them, I think, appear as sort of one community in this area. And we've also actually enclosed the stair towers in this case. But, you know, white siding. Here we do think, because it is a bit separated from the historic area of the community, maybe there is some stone on these buildings. So with that, that's sort of the pretty pictures. Chris, we have a couple slides here for you. You want to take us through some of these traffic improvements?
Certainly. Good evening, everybody. So a lot of the traffic presentation, many of you have already seen when we were going through the zoning process. So we're going to spare everybody those details, but we're just going to focus a little bit more on how the project has evolved from a traffic standpoint since we were last before you. So what you see on this screen is a concept plan for the main access to the project, located opposite the driveway to Shady Brook Farm. So just in terms of where we are in the process, we are, so Stony Hill Road is a state road, and all of the traffic improvements will be reviewed by the township and by PennDOT to secure a highway occupancy permit. So those plans are in the process of being prepared. This plan is a conceptual plan that shows in more detail than what you would have seen before, the main access into the project, which is on the top side of the screen, and then the bottom side of the screen is the access to Shady Brook Farm. So What we're showing here is Shady Brook Farm driveway. Looks very different on this slide than it does today in real life, in that we are now incorporating the Shady Brook Farm driveway into a new traffic signal that will be located at this intersection. We have turning lanes in and out of both the Prickett Preserve project and in and out of the Shady Brook Farm property. So this is a real enhancement for better access. We obviously have a traffic signal. We're showing the multi-use trail along the property frontage, along Stony Hill Road, and sidewalk leading from the community down to meet the trail along Stony Hill Road. And then we also show to the right side of the intersection a pedestrian crossing. So this new traffic signal will also include accommodations for pedestrians, pedestrian signals, and we have now, in addition to a vehicular interconnection, we now have a pedestrian interconnection where somebody could easily and safely cross between the new project and the Shady Brook Farm development. So really integrating both sides of Stony Hill Road. You want to go to the next slide? So this is the only other slide that I want to present, but you have all seen this before. So this slide, and it's a little bit hard to read, but this slide shows Stony Hill Road as it travels over I-295. Stony Hill Road is a 2-lane road. What you'll see on the left side of this slide is a widening of Stony Hill Road to introduce a landscaped median in the middle of Stony Hill Road. The purpose being to really create a gateway feature and slow traffic down as they're traveling from Township Line Road towards Edgewood Village. We want to really extend that Edgewood Village feel over the bridge over I-295 and slow traffic down on Stony Hill Road as they're entering towards Edgewood Village. So that is the intent that is the intent of that median to act as a gateway feature for traffic on Stony Hill Road. What this plan also shows, so there is an existing multi-use path on the south side of Stony Hill Road in this area. However, it terminates at I-295. Again, none of this is new. You've seen this, but what this plan shows is a sort of a reconfiguration of the lanes on Stony Hill Road over I-295, and we are carrying that multi-use path along the south side of Stony Hill Road. And then as the pedestrians or bicyclists would make their way to the sort of the east side, or in this case, the right side of I-295, that traffic would continue in that pedestrian and vehicular traffic would continue either in the form of an on-road bicycle facility or a new sidewalk shown in orange that would connect with the recently constructed sidewalk that was recently built as part of that senior living facility, the name of which escapes me right now. But again, none of this is new. And again, in this case, so you've seen this before. This is still a part of the plan. Stony Hill Road is a state road, so all of this will go through not only a township review process, but a PennDOT review process as well. And the plans for this path have not yet evolved beyond this concept plan, but really this concept plan will serve as the basis for the road improvement plans that are submitted to PennDOT. Beyond that, the rest of the traffic story is the same as you've already seen. We have a massive amount of off-site traffic improvements that are proposed along Newtown Bypass. Those are still proposed. None of that has changed. And all of that will be submitted jointly to PennDOT and to the township as we move through the PennDOT design process. Thank you.
So with that, I'm really going to wrap this up. I can leave this plan up here. I think with Chris ending with the traffic, I mean, the connectivity thing is I think the biggest aspect of this. And one thing I did not mention earlier is we're also proposing a link right here. Imagine these office workers being able to just walk right over here for lunch. Something as simple as that. And not having to get in their cars and go out on Stony Hill Road or the Newtown Bypass. And we think that's a huge benefit. So I can either leave this up. Well, why don't I do that? I'll leave this up and we can go from there.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation. Before we move forward, I think it's important that for anybody watching or listening at home, that they know that there is not an intention to take a vote on this project this evening, that this is the developers here with to highlight these new changes that have occurred with the plan, to go over some of the comments that have been provided to the developers by the township, and to solicit input from the Planning Commission, but that no vote is expected to occur this evening. And I just thought it was important that for those watching at home that they know that now. So with that, I will throw this to other members of the Planning Commission with any questions they might have about the presentation we just saw.
Good evening. I do have one question, and it is about the circle that is in our lower left-hand side of the screen. I'm just curious as to the purpose that serves. Do you envision that will be able to be cut off from traffic in a way that the area north of the public, or actually northeast, I should say, of the public space, as you described, could be cut off from traffic, right, where your cursor is over? What's the purpose of that? Because it does seem like it's possible to navigate to any other section without accessing that circle, but obviously there was intent there, so I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Sure. So, as any gathering space, or I'll tell you what, we do a lot of multifamily work as well. And one thing that we are now providing with every project are pick-off and drop-off locations. The rise of things like rideshare and Uber and Lyft are huge. And this is an area for that kind of drop-off and pickup. And it really serves as a sort of a civic marker, if you will. So sure, there are absolutely ways to get throughout this entire plan by bypassing this little area, but we actually think that is almost like an extension of the public space. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Good. Glad to hear that.
Okay.
And I said I had one question, and actually I'm going to continue momentarily. You said that you moved either created a new one or moved the in-outs, the additional yes. Can you talk through the change there just a little more?
Sure. And I might actually lean on Chris a little bit about this too. So this is a right in, right out. We already know that we have an access point here with a light. There's a minimum distance that you can have from access pole service access points. And we wanted to make sure that this guy right here was at least a right. Chris, is this right in, right out, or is it?
So yeah, Seth, let me jump in on this one. So the northernmost access where Seth's cursor is, that's right in, right out, left in. And that's the same as it had always been when we were last before the Planning Commission during the zoning review. Really nothing's changed from the plan you saw before, except where that little circle is that we just discussed potentially being closed off. There used to be an access that extended from that circle down to Stony Hill Road. That has been eliminated. Nothing else has changed. So the right in, right out, right where the cursor is now, that was always a right in, right out. And that is in the same location as it was the last time the plan was before you. So really all that happened is we went from 4 access locations down to 3 access locations. And that's because of, that was as a result of the PennDOT review process.
Okay. So if I understand this correctly, if I want to go south on Township Line Road or get to Stony Hill Road as it proceeds over 95, the only way I can do that is to the left out from the main traffic circle in the center.
That is correct.
Good.
Yeah, and again, we're designing that intersection to serve that purpose, and we're doing so really because that's the safest location to make a left turn. One, it's logical because for motorists that want to go to the south or want to go left, they're going to use the southernmost access point. And it's also, that's the location that has a traffic signal. So it's the safest to accommodate a left turn movement.
Very good. Thank you. That's all of my questions.
On that same traffic signal there, people making a left to go towards Stony Hill, will that be 2 left turning lanes since there is 2 lanes on Stony Hill, or will it just be 1 left-hand turn lane?
That is, am I on? No, I'm not on mute. I'm sorry. No, that is a single left turn lane. So the majority of traffic is really oriented more so to the north towards Newtown Bypass. So based on the initial traffic modeling, and I say initial, but we've probably have done 3 or 4 studies and updates now. But all of the traffic modeling results show that that intersection operates acceptably with a single exiting left turn lane. So that is 1 left turn lane. To do anything more would be unnecessary, and it would result in added pavement.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
Now, can you just, I guess it's more just, can you, like, you did a lot of talking about the open space and the public space on the commercial side of this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Can you walk through what your vision is for how people use the open space on the residential side? And, you know, 'cause I just looking at this, you know, that there's a lot of apartment buildings, obviously you're trying to get in here. And I guess I had a vision, no other reason, just what I assumed. There would be more space for the residents in the apartments to congregate whatever around the apartment buildings. And I really just see 1 space.
Sure. So I can try to take that, and maybe Bob Dwyer wants to talk about that as well. You know, when we design these multifamily communities, we try to actually organize them around a central gathering area as well. In this case, there's a clubhouse that will have both indoor and outdoor amenities. There's a pool area, and then there's an outdoor open space here. But I think in deference to trying to make this a really interconnected community and not really isolating the residential from the commercial, you know, I think having a civic open space like this, a 3-minute walk right from your apartment is an enormous amenity. And I can absolutely envision residents here actually using this as an open space as well. So you know, that would be my answer to that question. I don't know if Bob, if you want to jump in there at all.
Blow up of the clubhouse area, but there is open space around the clubhouse. The clubhouse is obviously a large accommodating rec facility that accommodate well more than we need as far as pool, outdoor space. We have other spaces in and around the buildings that we have not yet programmed, but there are other open space areas around the buildings that could accommodate, you know, dog parks, gardens, things like that we have at other jobs. So I think next time we come back, we'll blow up those areas to help answer those questions for you.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that is a really good point. And then the other thing is this is just 200 units. It's not on the large side for residential communities. It's relatively compact. Yeah.
Okay, and another question on this. I just maybe help me understand what you've done. Like, I had a really good kind of walk through of the property last month. That was really helpful for me to kind of get my head around some of the things you're doing. And where the main traffic circle is on the main entrance, like just, I guess that would be above that. So east of that, northeast of that. I love the way you kind of keeping most of those trees there, and you got the road coming in and out of there around the trees. It was a nice sort of natural buffer, not a forced buffer, but a nice natural buffer between some of the apartments and this, you know, the biggest building that's going to be over on the commercial side. That's the Wegmans. And I noticed as you get, and I think I made a comment on the tour to someone about this, just where that pharmacy is and that one apartment that's closest to Stony Hill Road. It's pretty, that one apartment's pretty out there. The rest of them are kind of, you know, nice. There's green around them and everything. That one apartment building's going to have, you know, it's essentially a road next to them, a store right across the street, right on the corner of a busy road. And can you tell us how you're going to try and buffer that to make it not seem like the ugly duckling of the bunch in the apartment buildings?
Well, it's interesting. I know if I was actually to choose a building to live in this community, it might actually be that one. Okay. So I could actually be closer to the action. So those 24 apartments that sit in that building, I think will certainly have a draw or a market. I don't think I'm that unique. That being said, the drawing here is a little misleading in how large this site actually is. I don't know if one of the Bowler guys can tell us offhand how far actually that sits back from the sidewalk that is on the main entry drive, but I'm guessing it may be close to 20 feet or 15 feet from that sidewalk.
Correct, Seth. It's set back about 20 feet.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that we have on the entrance, unlike the piece of the road to the top, that lower piece we've created a landscape median. So you can actually have landscaping in that median. So you have an added area for buffer, and then you also have a landscape buffer on the opposite side between it and the building and its parking lot. So you essentially have 3 layers of buffering. They may not necessarily what you have on the eastern side, but you do have areas where you can add vegetation to buffer that building.
All right, so essentially you're planning on some level of planting between that one apartment building, the sidewalk, you have the median, and then there's probably between the pharmacy and the sidewalk on the other side.
Correct. And that's another 25 feet on that side.
Got it. All right, that was one thing. Even as I was walking the site, that kind of struck me is that apartment building is going to be a little bit different than the other buildings, just from a setting standpoint. And I was just wanted to kind of get an idea of what your plans were to. I know you can't conceal that, and I'm not suggesting you should, but what were your plans to sort of soften that?
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question about the retail side of the project and what sort of establishments, restaurants, what are going to be the draws to get, well, to service the people that are living in the apartments, and also the draws for to bring people in.
I said it at prior meetings. Obviously, Wegmans is the lease that we have signed and committed to the site. We are in the final stages of negotiating with the pharmacy and with a financial institution, and we are working with a restaurant operator for the barn, which we Seth touched on in our presentation, that I believe will come to fruition. As for the other buildings, we have dealt with other restaurants, some national chains, but with the current restaurant environment due to COVID, a lot of that is on hold. And we envision not actively marketing a lot of this facility until we're about to break ground, which will hopefully be in the 9 to 12 month area, and will give us an additional 12 months to lease those remaining spots.
You anticipate just one restaurant or more than one restaurant?
We anticipate several.
Okay. So in building 5 and 6, that would be more retail or potentially restaurant as well?
Well, as Seth mentioned, all the buildings are set up currently to have outdoor dining space. So depending on the operation and the size of the operation, any one of those buildings can handle additional or can accommodate dining facilities. I will share one facility that we have a letter of intent from that was kind of put on hold, not for the barn, but for one of the other retail buildings is First Watch. We are sitting with a letter of intent for many, many months that went on hold as soon as the COVID pandemic began. So it's operations like that. And there's a couple other national chains that we have been speaking to, but again, we don't have any of that locked up for sure that I can tell you tonight.
Okay, thank you.
With regard to the open space on the commercial side of the property, who do you envision maintaining that space? Or how is that space that is maintained by the tenants, maintained by the township? Who's responsible for it?
The open space will be maintained by the tenants as common area maintenance and charged back in their leases.
Okay. You'd mentioned you're working with PennDOT on off-site traffic improvements, which we've talked about at prior meetings, but do you have any sort of time frame where you expect to have a more clear picture of what that's going to look like?
Yeah, Chris, can you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've actually submitted the traffic impact study, the same studies that the township has seen. We've submitted those studies now a couple of times to PennDOT. So we have a very clean letter from PennDOT. We have some minor technical details that need to be addressed. But our next submission to PennDOT, which will include the updated traffic study to address a few minor comments, but our next submission to PennDOT will not only include the traffic impact study, but it will also be our first submission of the highway occupancy permit design plans. So we're in the process of engineering those plans as we speak. So the next submission we anticipate will be in January, and the township will be copied concurrently on that submission as well. So we intend to move through the PennDOT process in partnership with the township and keep the township informed all the way through.
Okay. One of the things that the Planning Commission has discussed at prior meetings, not about this project, but in a more general sense, has been electric charging stations. Is that something you envision in this site at all?
We do. The Wegmans parking area will have several electric charging stations, and we will probably locate several in the general commercial area also. And then
as well as the apartments. We'll have a couple in the apartment area as well.
Okay. I don't think I personally have further questions about what you've presented this evening so far. What about other Planning Commission members?
I do have one other thing. Now I'm kind of looking at this rendering. But right now, the walking path across the bridge from Edgewood Village over here is on, I guess, the south side of Stony Hill Road. And that's what that sort of drives. You can't really cross over Stony Hill until you get down to the Township Line Road intersection. Like, what was the rationale? Like, was it just the fact of where the path was on the Edgewood Village side? Why you wouldn't come through on the north side of that bridge, and to give kind of a nice little perk for the people that live over in the apartments there that could get a lot more quickly or easily over to Edgewood Village by foot rather than having to go all the way around to the main entrance and back around?
Sure. So I can take that. So it's a good question. There's a reason that the path is on the south side of Stony Hill Road today, and that's because the grades are better on that side. So the grades are very difficult on the north side of Stony Hill Road. And then when you cross I-295, the grades continue to be a problem, and the sidewalk and everything is on the south side of Stony Hill Road. So we're just really tying into what's already been started, and I believe it's all there for a good reason.
Yeah, you understand on national that'd be a nice benefit for those 3 or 4 apartment buildings over there, for the people that live there to be able to get easily over to Stony Hill. And I'm just not sure how you do that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. It just geometrically it becomes a problem, and you only want to cross at this point. You only want to cross the road at the control of a traffic signal if you have that opportunity. So we're sort of dictated to bring it back to this traffic signal location anyway. But it's unfortunate, but I understand what you're saying. But the geometry really dictates the solution that we've presented.
Yeah. Also, there's no other entranceway before the one with the light that will service only the residential area. So everyone living on the residential side would have to go to the first entrance, I guess, with the light, correct?
Correct.
There's no other entranceway anticipated for just servicing the residential area.
Correct.
Questions from the Planning Commission before we kind of tackle some of the comments that are out there?
I have one question, Tony, for the applicant.
Go ahead, Jim.
I know you talked about reconfiguring sort of that common open space, and you had a couple of alternatives there. Is there any difference in impervious surface between the different alternatives you had there, or is it all fairly consistent?
Travis.
It's all fairly consistent. We're doing a bit of a trade-off because some of the areas in there, we're introducing a lot of planting space in there that we're not showing on the submitted land development plan set. Obviously, the intent would be to be well within the permitted pervious area, or the permitted impervious area.
And currently, the maximum impervious allowed is 65%, and the current design is around 63%. So we do have a little bit of buffer to work with, but none of the changes that we are proposing in that open space are significant enough to increase the impervious to a non-compliance.
Thank you.
I have one more question. In the engineering letter, item number 25 under the zoning comments was the recommendation of incorporating bioretention areas into the proposed parking lot design. Is that, Andy, I don't know if you care to comment on that, if there's any force behind that, or if that's just merely a recommendation, or if that is intended and will be contemplated going forward.
That's for the applicant. I don't think that it's a requirement, but it's encouraged.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that we will be looking at as part of any modifications that we make to this plan to address those comments. There's a number of areas, some landscaped islands, some perimeter landscaped areas around parking fields that we can adjust so that they can be used for some type of a rain guard or bioretention facility.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, so as we move forward, there are quite a few review letters. I understand that the applicant has submitted some responses which the Planning Commission may have just received this evening, or Planning Commission members may have just received this evening and have not had an opportunity to look at. I don't know if we want to go through some of those at this point. Maybe it probably makes sense to at least discuss some more of the issues that Ross was bringing up and some others in the Remington-Vernick letter of November 6th.
Yeah, so the response letter that we had submitted, obviously it was just recently. We tried to identify within that response letter those comments that we felt were substantive enough that we would want to address it to show you that we are clarifying our design or that we intend to comply. The vast majority of all of the comments in all of the various letters that are not included in there will comply. There's some very, very specific, detail-oriented plan and report comments that we can easily address. What I would like to do is just mostly go through Remington and Vernon's letter and highlight some of the zoning issues, because I know that those typically are things we want to ensure that you feel safe and comfortable that what we're proposing actually complies with the ordinance. So I'll go through those briefly. The first comment is related to the gross tract area needing to be 30 acres. So obviously this is an assembly of properties that will be consolidated into one property that is approximately 37 acres. So we do comply with that provision of the mixed use ordinance. So the plans will be modified to include a lot consolidation plan to demonstrate that compliance. And that any other lots that would be created in the future, either by subdivision or by planned community or condominium, those obviously are permitted as part of the mixed use ordinance that was passed. As part of this plan, there were two buildings. There's the pharmacy and the bank. Each of those buildings have a drive-through component to them. Those are shown on the plans. An application has been submitted to the township for consideration of conditional use, so that once we get to that point in the process, any recommendation that the Planning Commission would give would also be towards conditional use, and that we would then subsequently have a hearing in front of the Board of Supervisors to address any of the specific aspects of conditional use. But the plan as presented does comply with those aspects, that the drive-throughs are obviously segregated from pedestrian areas, and the appropriate amount of stacking is provided at each one of the drive-through lanes.
Can you show the location of those drive-through lanes?
Yeah, sure. So correct. They're behind the pharmacy. And then the other drive-through is all the way to the northern portion of the property, to the north of what is now called out as a bank or retail building.
That one's actually external to the building. It's
correct.
Right. It would be right in here.
So if I look at this, you're sort of proposing and constructing one place that will essentially, if it's always a drive-through, it's always going to just be an ATM, regardless of what happens to the building, because you can't do anything with just a little kiosk. But the pharmacy drive-through could conceivably be anything if somebody down the road repurposes the building to something other than a pharmacy.
They could, yes. And the area that is actually to the north behind the bank, that area is actually large enough that you could, if they wanted to remove that, you could, and then convert that into parking spaces.
Okay.
In the future, if it was necessary.
Right, but it couldn't really be used for anything other than an ATM. It was my point.
Correct.
Unlike the pharmacy could conceivably be converted to a restaurant or whatever, that any other business that would have drive-through, it could be repurposed for any of that. It's more flexible.
But not there's a limit on the types of businesses that can have a drive-through. So just because the building had a drive-through component would not allow the uses which aren't on the list to have drive-through service.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I understood. I was kind of looking at that, thinking of this right. But yeah, I do understand that there are limitations to it. So, okay.
All right, so moving on, next comment was related to renderings. Obviously, we've submitted a number of renderings, presented them here this evening. Those will continue to be refined as we go through any revision process with the plans. Next is for submission of a application for a certificate of appropriateness for any of the historic buildings. So that kind of ties to a lot of the comments generated from the Historical Commission. Obviously, there is a study being done on those structures. When that's complete, we'll be able to submit that we'll review it internally. We'll be able to submit it to the township for their consideration. And obviously, any of the requirements outlined in that report will be incorporated into the design that we've presented here this evening. There's a question regarding how we're noting the maximum permissible density. The base density in the ordinance is 12 dwelling units per acre. The maximum that you can increase that to is 14 and a half. We're getting that by the bonus provision for the pedestrian connection that we are proposing over Stony Hill Road. So we will ensure that our plans accurately reflect that is the bonus that we are taking advantage of. The next item was related to the existing detention basin that's at the southwest corner of the property at Stony Hill and Township line, and including that in our site capacity calculations. Obviously, this property was part of previous applications and approvals, and those plans actually, there's precedent that that area was not included in the site capacity calculations. So we would rely on those previous interpretations. We've also analyzed that area, and if in fact we were required to include it in our site capacity, our development would still comply. So in either way, including or excluding that basin would not alter the plan as we presented it here this evening.
Hey, Bill, which comment are you referring to in the Remington letter?
I believe that's comment number 7.
Thank you.
Comment number 8. So this probably will lead to a number of questions. This is regarding the number of parking spaces that we are proposing on the property. So there are 2 different parking provisions. There is the 5 per 1,000 for the commercial, and there's 1.5 spaces per unit for the residential. The residential plan right now has about 1.8 spaces per unit. That's 358 spaces. And essentially our design for that is it meets the minimum of 1.5, but then we've also added approximately, general rule of thumb, around 1/4 of a space per unit for overflow spaces, get you to about 1.75. So our design is generally to that level. For the commercial, the requirement's 5 per 1,000. We have a total of 855 spaces. Obviously, that's a higher ratio than 5 per 1,000. That's driven primarily by, obviously, our main user here is Wegmans. For a building of this size, which is 100,000 square feet, their goal is to have a minimum of 575 parking spaces, ideally closer to 600. Our plan currently has 576. We're at the low end of the threshold for them from an operational standpoint. So their ratio is a little bit higher than the 5 per 1,000. But then the balance of the commercial, the ratio there is essentially on or just below the 5 per 1,000, so that we're getting to a number of parking spaces that will meet the operational demands of Wegmans, but then also still meets the ordinance requirements for the balance of the commercial. The other piece to consider, and the way that we've designed the space that Seth had pointed out, is we've got a number of parking spaces that are located adjacent to the open space that's part of this development. We want to ensure that at any point in time, if we are closing that off and utilizing that space for any type of activities, that the balance of the center would still have sufficient parking to support the needs of the buildings that are there. So there's some additional parking to buffer that. So based on what we've reviewed, we feel that the parking that we have on this plan obviously complies with the minimum requirements, but then also adds some additional buffer for those instances where you do need additional parking.
One thing that I'd like to throw out there is, does this plan incorporate cart corrals or anything like that within the parking lot for Wegmans?
Yes, it already does.
That's in addition to the parking spaces.
Correct. The parking space count of 576 for them excludes cart corral spaces. Those are already allocated for carts.
And one thing for everyone to note, our existing ordinance for parking for both retail and restaurant uses typically contemplates one space for every 150 square feet of sales area or net floor area, which when you include the back end part of the stores and everything, probably equates to that 1 per 200 that they're proposing.
So that comment ties into the next comment, number 9, which is holding spaces in reserve. Obviously, the ordinance allows for that provision, obviously based on where we feel the parking design is right now, and that it would meet the demands of what we're anticipating. We're not looking to hold any parking in reserve at this point. And the last comment from a zoning standpoint is regarding loading areas. By ordinance, I think the maximum that we would need on the property is 5. The majority of them are allocated towards the Wegmans area. There's additional one in the commercial. These buildings are a little unique in that the way that they're going to be serviced is generally by smaller trucks, not by your typical tractor trailers. So they'll obviously take advantage of the parking spaces for smaller kind of single unit loading trucks. So we would envision that the loading for the smaller buildings, they would be able to utilize parking in those off-peak times. Are there any questions on anything from a zoning standpoint?
So you're saying that loading then would occur for restaurants and banks and pharmacy. There's no loading berth.
So
for those buildings, you would rely on existing parking spaces or loading spots.
Right. So we've done these in a number of other locations where you've got some of the parking spaces that you can sign that they can be used for loading. The pharmacy itself does have its own loading area that's kind of shown with a hatch pattern to the rear, which is adjacent to the drive-through. So that itself does, and typically pharmacies have larger vehicles that do deliver to them. So that design meets that requirement. But the rest of the buildings are different in character, and their loading operations are different than a typical commercial structure. The other things that I wanted to highlight from an ordinance standpoint, and these will obviously still need to be refined as we work through a number of the modifications. We are preliminarily asking for 5 waivers from the subdivision and land development ordinance. I'll review them for you quickly and be happy to entertain any questions. The first waiver that we've identified is from section 178-53, and that is for parking or lighting in parking areas. The requirement is for those light standards to be behind curbing. And a lot of this is generated because of the parking field associated with Wegmans. We have 4 poles in that area. We have 1 in the residential that you'll have a pole located within the parking field, but we'll have a larger foundation to prevent any damage to that pole. So it's a limited number of poles in the parking fields, but those pole locations are necessary in order to provide a uniform distribution of light across that parking field, so you don't get areas of very bright or very dark lighting. The next is also related to lighting, section 178-53.
Before you move on, if I could just ask, where in the residential area would you propose to put the 1 pole?
Travis, if you're on, Travis does our lighting design. If you could pinpoint the location of where that would be.
Yes, the light pole in question is the double stacked parking between building unit 1 and building 9 over there, which is closer to Stony Hill Road. You were asking about the residential portion.
Yes, I am.
Yeah,
right
so
there.
In that parking field there, correct.
Right about where the cursor is right now. That's the only one in the residential area that we need that.
Okay.
Any additional questions?
And the purpose of placing that there is why? Just if you could explain that.
So from a lighting perspective, if we remove that one pole in the center, we have to replace it with 4 additional poles around the perimeter. Obviously, that could lead to light transfer off the property, but it also restricts the amount of landscaping we can do around the parking lot.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. The next waiver, as I was saying, was section 17853A, and that is for the height of the light standards. And this is specific to the Wegmans parking field. The requirement is that their maximum height is 20 feet, and we are looking to propose them at 25 feet. And this is primarily, one, to have a better distribution of light, and then 2, obviously to minimize the number of poles in that parking field. So by reducing the number of light fixtures, we can get a better distribution of light and have a more uniform lighting level across the parking field. And at the end of the day, ends up with a better design than multiple additional light poles at a lower height. Moving on. So number 3 is section 17857G, and that is for the separation of parking from buildings. The code requires 20 feet, and we meet that in a number of locations. The vast, I believe the entire residential area meets that requirement. It's primarily focused in the commercial portion. It varies anywhere from about 8 to 15 feet in those areas where it is less than 20. You have an area that's in front of the pharmacy where there is sidewalk adjacent to the building. You're around 8 feet in that location. And then to the north, I guess where buildings 2 and 3 are, you have some areas which are around 12 to 10 feet. The main area around the central open space, those buildings, the parking is separated by about 15 to 16 feet from the buildings. So it doesn't meet the 20 foot, but it still provides that sufficient separation from the building. Those areas where it's closer, there's either curb stops or bollards protecting the buildings and the sidewalk areas. And it's still sufficient room for pedestrian circulation and safety. Next item is 17885H4A, and that is regarding tree replacement. Obviously, there are a significant number of existing trees on the property. We are preserving a number of them. We are preserving 50% of the trees. A lot of them are located within the central open space, the area that you had referred to before, where we're realigning our access road around the end of the parking field for Wegmans, and then all of the vegetation that essentially surrounds the northern and eastern property boundaries. That is all existing and being preserved. There are some areas within the site that we are removing, and the tree replacement requirement, when you look at the number of trees that are required, there just physically isn't enough room on the property to plant all of those trees. Now, there are a number of comments in the letter where there are some additional areas where we can look to add some additional landscaping, and we will most definitely take advantage of those areas to try to help reduce the differential where we are. But at this point, we're seeking a waiver from that requirement for those trees that we physically cannot fit on the property. Last one is 17895F, and that is for topsoil protection. Obviously, we will reuse as much topsoil as we can, but recognizing that the majority of it now is farm field, we're not going to be able to reuse all of that topsoil. and it will have to be relocated to another property or to another location where it can be stockpiled.
So I think with all those waivers, you know, the applicant is proposing to adjust the plans and then resubmit for the Planning Commission to provide their recommendation. I think at that time, once we have the opportunity to review the revised submission, we can make a recommendation on whether we, the township engineer, would support that waiver or not.
I'd just like to, if we could hear from either Jim or Andy about the request for waiver number 3 to allow parking spaces closer than 20 feet to a building between 8 and 15 feet. The applicant said they're going to put bollards in and things of that sort, but is it present a fire safety or traffic safety hazard that we should be concerned about? And should we be, if so, should we be alerting the applicant to it now?
I mean, to my knowledge, no, I don't see any real issue with fire safety. I mean, we have the township traffic engineer on who can speak to traffic safety, but there's certainly commercial properties that have a setback distance from parking spaces in line with what's being proposed here.
It should be noticed that our fire protection consultant, Tim Chamberlain, has reviewed the plan, and he had no concerns expressed about the location of the parking in relation to the building. He did note a bunch of areas where fire lanes need to be clearly marked on the plan, but he had no specific concerns with the closeness of the parking spaces to the building.
And I don't want to prematurely move on, but is the applicant proposing or intending to go through other comments within the review letter or was that it?
Yeah, at this point, we don't plan on going through the rest of them because we intend to submit revised plans. I think it would be premature to go through all the comments. And the vast majority, as we've indicated, it's our intention to comply or provide a response that indicates how we do comply with the application.
I would agree with that. There are a couple that I'd like to discuss and bring to the Planning Commission's attention. If the PC agrees with that. Okay. So the first item is off the main entrance, just to the right. That is a pump station. Is there a reason why that particular corner where it's right at the main entrance, is there a particular reason why that was chosen in that location?
So that is the most logical location from a topography standpoint. The site essentially drains to that location. So all of the sanitary sewer from a design standpoint makes sense to get that location, and it provides easy access for the force main to then run along Stony Hill Road. It does run in the southerly direction down Township line. So it provides the shortest run of force main from the property. And that area, while it is close to the intersection, it is set back enough that we can provide fencing and buffering so that from an aesthetic standpoint, it's not a problem.
That would be my main concern, is from an aesthetic standpoint, whether you have a rendering of that or not.
You know, it also it's actually a perfect place for some signage, for some low wall signage. which may actually in turn hide that pump station from a ground view. So it's something that we're still working through.
The township's consultant supplied some architectural details that he suggested would be included, which is an A-frame roof, some stone veneer, and things like that. So we can share that rendering, which we agree with on our next meeting.
And just to be clear, that came from our sewer engineer, Mr. Ebert?
Correct. As a recommendation, which we would agree with.
Next item is you have one trash reception area provided on the plan for the proposed apartments. It's almost,
Yeah, sure.
it's almost 1,000 feet from the furthest apartment building to the trash reception area.
Yeah, we looked at that. We have other projects, in fact, an identical project with a similar facility on the way out of the development that has worked very efficiently for like 10 years. We can look at adding another one, but we don't think it's necessary. We'll take a look at it and try to give you more details, but we've had no issues at all in New Britain. It's a 20-yard dumpster, similar to this one, and it'll be, it operates very efficiently. We wouldn't want to do anything other than that, and clearly the one has worked well. We'd like to keep it that way so as to not trash up the project, but so to speak. But obviously, if the planning commission or board think another is necessary, we will discuss it, but we don't believe it's necessary.
The proposed clock tower at Wegmans is 80 feet above the proposed grade with a 4-foot 9-inch spire on top. Proposed grade level at the base of the tower is elevation 173, while the elevation of Township Line Road is approximately 158 at the main entrance to the site. So essentially, that's an extra 15 feet. That clock tower from the main entrance looks about 95 feet in height.
Can you bring up the rendering you had that shows it?
Sure. But it may be worth, since we have modeled this site, it may be worth actually providing some sort of three-dimensional view from that standpoint, because my guess is with the building and the vegetation in the foreground, I'm not sure how tall it's going to appear. It's also set back pretty far.
Yeah, and across from 295, you've got Patterson Farms there. So the view shed from that direction may be impacted by the tower.
Can you give just this is more just to kind of give perspective, because that's not that far from the radio antenna of the cell tower.
All right, which is right
how
here.
How tall is that cell tower?
134 feet.
So it's like essentially 40, 50 feet shorter than that cell tower.
Almost exactly 50 feet tall, shorter. Yeah.
And I'm just asking just to kind of give if I go drive by there and look tomorrow, I have a kind of perspective of where that is.
Also, there's a lower bank of tower antennas on the tower that isn't shown in their little rendering here. But basically, the height of the clock tower would be somewhere between the lowest antenna and the next one up.
Do we miss some of the antennas?
Yeah, there's another bank of antennas that on your rendering would be probably where it says the numbers below existing tree buffer.
Yeah, okay.
Do you want to discuss public transportation and whether that's going to be incorporated into the development or the means for public transportation?
So as of right now, we are not. I'm not aware of a SEPTA bus route that goes past this frontage. I know there's school buses that go there. I've seen them many times go into Shady Brook, but I'm not aware of the public transportation component. We can clearly ask SEPTA if they have any plans for that. But at this point, we're not making any accommodations. But that's not to say that there isn't sufficient room for it to be accommodated if at some point it becomes necessary.
So, replacement trees, do you have an idea for how many replacement trees are needed? And you're sure, can we get back into that waiver request that, you're removing so many trees, it would require so many replacement trees, and you're providing, I think it's a significantly less number of trees that are being provided. Is what would be required for replacement trees. And
I can speak to that.
Go ahead, Travis.
The trees requiring replacement that we are removing from the site is 353 trees. That therefore by ordinance requires 1,667 replacement trees. We are providing 687 on site. And as Bill noted earlier, there are a number of places where we are going to be able to add further, and we expect that number, our deficiency number, to decline. But as submitted right now, our deficiency is 980 trees.
And is your intention to not provide a fee in lieu of?
Yeah, our request is for a waiver for the tree replacement and fee in lieu.
This is not for the developers, more for the planning commission, but I struggle with this one. I think I've articulated this before in front of the same audience. I feel like, the waiver request that we're asked to sort of say, or do we agree with, not agree with, you're sort of like, you have a solution to fix something that our ordinances don't help them with the solution. So they're kind of stuck and they need help putting it forward in some logical way, because that's the way the engineering works. In the tree ordinance, as much as people think it's onerous, the Board of Supervisors has already given a waiver to planting all the trees, and they put it in our ordinances. It is on our books. If you don't want to plant all the trees in the way the Board of Supervisors has defined they ought to be planted, then there's a fee to be paid. And I don't think it's the Planning Commission's job to sit there and say, I think our ordinances are bad, therefore I'm going to recommend that we don't follow our ordinances when there is already an out that the Board of Supervisors provided. If the Board of Supervisors don't like that ordinance anymore, they should change it. I kind of feel strongly about this one. There was a lot of angst and a lot of hand wringing and a contentious vote when the Board of Supervisors did this. And I don't think it's the Planning Commission's job to then go essentially behind the scenes and say, I don't like their solution for this one. I think they should do something different. They've already provided a solution for this question.
We're requesting a waiver. Obviously, it's in the board's purview to grant that or not. We understand that. So we're requesting it, and partly because of all the off-site traffic improvements and things like that we're doing that are above and beyond what would be required. So we would like to ask for it and understand the Planning Commission can make a recommendation, yes or no, and we'll discuss it with the supervisors in detail.
And I hope you don't get me wrong. I'm not necessarily trying to imply I think your request is unwarranted or anything like that. But that's why I said it's more for the Planning Commission. That's why I struggle with this, because I feel like it comes up almost every time. And I think in this case, it's of course always up to the supervisors to eventually approve whatever they want to. That's their purview. And I struggle as a planning commission to sit there and say, how many times will we go back and say, well, we don't think our ordinance is right, so we're going to recommend we do something different on the same issue?
So I apologize. I missed part of the beginning of that discussion because my battery on my computer died and I couldn't find the cord, and I'm on a different computer now. But I tend to agree with you, Adrian, that, you know, what I had heard before the battery died on my computer was that the waiver that was to be sought was for 50% fewer trees. And that's a big number. That's not even close. And I heard the applicant mention the offsite road improvements of $6.5 million, which are obviously a big deal, not inconsequential, but quite honestly, they're unrelated to the trees. And, you know, I'm with Adrian about this. I don't think I'm not inclined to go for waivers on this. And if they can't be fit on the property, then certainly the applicant, I would think, could provide money as a ordinance allows into the tree bank.
And we'll modify the plan to incorporate the additional trees that both Bill and Travis have spoken about, and come to what that number is and what the fee might be in lieu of, and we'll discuss it next time before the Planning Commission.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Those are the only items that pertain to site design layout within my review letter that I feel is germane to the discussion at this time. I did provide a review letter for the environmental impact assessment. I don't know if we want to go through that, or there's a couple of items within there that require, one is an alternatives analysis. I think that might be relevant to discuss. And then the other is noise and air quality impact. I think that would be something that should be discussed, particularly noise. If you're planning on having outdoor concerts in right along Stony Hill Road there, well, I say right along, but recognizing that it is set back from Stony Hill Road. What would be the noise impact on property across the street, properties next door? Also, you know, the noise from 295 onto the adjacent apartments, and has that been investigated? Do we anticipate any impact there?
Going to modify the environmental impact report as you requested, and we'll resubmit that with the plans going forward, so we can talk about it at that point if you'd like.
So with the alternatives analysis, then I think that, you know, in your response letter, you had discussed the warehouse option.
Yes.
You want to expand on that?
Yeah, we provided an alternatives analysis that shows the warehouse being 450,000 square feet roughly. When you compare that to what we're proposing, both traffic-wise, fiscally, and aesthetically, we've laid out in detail, at least on our response, why this proposal is far greater, far better for the township than a warehouse proposal, between the tractor trailers, number of trucks, the aesthetics of a warehouse versus this facility. The fact that this facility we're proposing is going to be a public accessible area with open space versus a warehouse, which would be completely private, mostly paved over and just generating trucks all day with no real economic benefit to the township. I mean, they're the things that we will spell out in more detail. A lot of these things were talked about during the rezoning, but we'll certainly put them in a more concise response so that you have what you're looking for.
What about alternatives on site? For instance, layout of buildings. Did you look at, and one thing that kind of jumps out at me is you've got some apartment buildings, 4 along the top, theoretically, you could put 4 opposite those and take advantage of additional parking underneath those 4 buildings, and then relocate the clubhouse. Have you looked at the layout as it sits on the site, and did you investigate alternatives there?
Yeah, we had probably 6 or 7 different sketches we looked at over the course of the last 8 years that we've been trying to do residential on this property. I think the layout we have now provides, I think, as Seth indicated, he had located the buildings with the garages along 295 for obvious reasons. Right. We built the villages of Makefield years ago that are lined. There's probably 600 units down there against 95 or 295. Back then it was 95 that we sold, and these were for sale product 10 years ago, 20 years ago. There was never an issue with the noise, and we don't suspect there'll be any here with the construction that's now available for soundproofing along 295. We don't anticipate any issues at all, as has been evident up and down 295 on both sides of 295 through the township and elsewhere. But the layout has been looked at. Seth has probably done more than 10 different layouts, and this is the one we think provides the best product, the best pedestrian connectivity, the most open space, the best market sensitivity. And it's also probably one of the more attractive buildings you'll see. So I think it satisfies all those requirements. If you need to see some of the other sketches, we can show you in a booklet, but I don't think there's anything that we would want to do other than what we're showing here tonight.
Bob, you just mentioned soundproofing along 295. Is that something
the buildings themselves, we wouldn't be putting any walls up, but the buildings themselves, there's windows and construction that provides a much quieter unit in certain locations. That's what we would be doing.
Okay.
I just to kind of follow up, I think it would be helpful to see some of the other alternatives that were considered, sketches that might be included in the environmental impact assessment report.
Okay, we'll show you some of the ones we had. We had no intention of changing the plan, though. This is the one we've come to terms with, and I think there's the other ones would be something which would not comply with the current ordinance and would not be something we'd want to be able to build. But we'll share it with you. No problem.
Yeah.
One of Andy's comments about sound and whether or not the open space area would have concerts, whatever. Obviously, we don't envision, to have the, blaring concert with 30 pieces of musical instruments. But it was something that was specifically mentioned at our zoning review and talks about having the ability to have township activities in that open space area, i.e. a concert. We're perfectly agreeable to limiting the activities there if the township has certain things that they would not like to see. But again, that area was made available and committed to by us to allow the township to also host activities there if they so desired.
On top of that, the only residents you're going to have anywhere near that will be residents who will know going in what that property is being used for. We're not going to be encumbering any existing residents with a proposed use that they would not be welcoming. Plus, with Shady Brook across the street, I think his neighborhood's well aware of what goes on there during the holidays. So I think we'll be the least issue in that neck of the woods.
I think that's all I had.
Does anybody else from the Planning Commission have any further questions of the applicant at this time? Does not appear to be that there are any. It seems that consensus would be that it does not make sense to go through the other review letters in closely because of the changing nature of what is being submitted and what's being worked on right now. Unless there's something that the applicant wants to specifically inquire about of the Planning Commission for feedback.
No, we're planning to go back and address the comments that were received from all of the various reviews and resubmitted. And then I think we'll be in a position to have those kind of detailed comments, but to go through review after review after review with us saying we'll comply, just doesn't, I don't think, is a wise use of any of our time.
I think we'd all agree with that. Before we let you go, though, I think we'd like to hear if there's any public comment at this time.
Yep, moving them in now. Dr. Tenney, could you please hit *6 to unmute?
Yes, good evening. I want to let you know this meeting's quite difficult to enter and was not well advertised by the township. The Prickett Preserve development was approved despite considerable citizen objection regarding.
If I could interrupt for one moment, if you could identify yourself, please.
Yeah, I live at 156 Pinnacle Circle. My name is Dr. Lisa Bruninger Tenney.
Thank you. I'm sorry, please continue with your comments.
Okay, so the Prickett Preserve development was approved despite considerable citizen objection regarding traffic, safety, economic, and environmental concerns. This development is not consistent with the master plan of 2019, rather instead makes Lower Makefield look like anywhere USA. Currently, the only two criterion met to make this land ordinance change a true use of mixed-use zoning is the distance from LMT Center at Edgewood and its size. You've misinterpreted the true use of mixed-use zoning, which is to provide interconnections with the town center rather than within the development itself. The development will affect LMT citizens and Bucks County residents and visitors to Bucks County alike. Most concerning is the final plan is the lack of commitment to the safety to all neighboring roads and intersections that will certainly be taxed on a daily basis, that will have to handle pedestrians, cars, both from Bucks County and neighboring regions. There's no acknowledgement in this final approval plan of how the most important unifying feature of mixed-use overlay zoning, a safe bike pedestrian path that's 8 foot wide over I-295 on Stony Hill South Side will be built. Who and how this safety feature will be built and how this feature will be paid for. This 8-foot pedestrian path is paramount and will enable the safe transport of cars, trucks, pedestrians, and bikes into the town center of Edgewood. This safety feature is absent in the final plan. In my opinion, the safety measures should be addressed and paid in full prior to the development and performed in a logical sequence as part of the final plan of the development. I have absolutely nothing to gain by objecting to this development, except good conscience. As I would not like to see anyone injured or killed by approving the development with a potential fatal flaw, act in haste, or overlook such important matters. The Bucks County Planning Commission makes recommendations which have been grossly overlooked and not considered. They do not approve but give recommendations. And I believe that the responsibility and liability of this development lies in the hands of the municipality of LMT and the LMT Board of Supervisors and its advisory committees. Please refrain from using the word preserve or Edgewood, as both of these are misleading terms. Also, please state your references upon which your project that's being constructed was based upon. The clock tower is not needed in this development, as we can just add 15 minutes to any time we need to exit LMT. And and also you must, if you don't already know, that the Shady Brook Farms holds nice concerts all year long in an outdoor venue, which is quite nice. So we don't even need whatever is going on across the street, which is a concrete jungle and randomly designed. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Just before we move on to the next comments, I would like to note that the last commentator mentioned that the plan had been approved, and that has not happened. There is no preliminary approval yet. There's no final approval. Traffic plan's not before us. Safety features will be considered at the appropriate time for obviously safe traffic improvements, including those going over on Stony Hill over 295. If there's any further public comment, if they could be brought in.
No further public comment.
Okay. At this point, I think we've concluded with this evening's presentation on the Prickett Preserve. Unless the applicant has anything further, I think we're ready to move on to the next item on our agenda.
Further, we appreciate the time that the Planning Commission has given us to make this presentation. We look forward to revising the plans and returning to you with most of the issues, all of the issues we hope addressed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
So next item on our agenda is any other business. Does anybody have any?
Mr. Bush, if I may, I believe our next Planning Commission meeting will be Monday, November 30th. I'll be looking at seeing what we have on the agenda for that time to see if we will in fact need that meeting. But tentatively, that's the date of the next meeting, which is a week after our normal meeting date of the 23rd. So I think the meeting of the 23rd, you should make a motion to cancel that, and then note that the meeting will be held on the 30th.
Okay, do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Was that seconded?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And do we have a motion for an adjournment?
A motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.
All right, guys.
See everybody on the 30th.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Night.